Hi friends, subscribe to me, it's important, and listen to the real story of my friend. Here's an updated version of Fractured Hearts with the addition of Sophie's infidelity as a contributing factor to the divorce. Sophie and Daniel had been the golden couple for as long as anyone could remember. They met in college, fell deeply in love, and everyone around them believed they were soulmates. Their friends used to say, asterisk, if anyone is going to make it, it's them. Asterisk, and for a while, it seemed like they would. They married young, had 2 children, and lived a seemingly perfect life in a cozy suburban home. Daniel worked as a lawyer, putting in long hours to support the family, while Sophie chose to stay home with the kids while they were little. From the outside, everything looked perfect, but beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to form. It started with Daniel's long work hours, which Sophie had learned to accept. But over time, what had begun as late nights at the office turned into weekends away and more distance between them. They still said, "I love you" out of habit, but the warmth had faded from their marriage, replaced by quiet frustrations and unspoken resentments. The turning point came during the 3rd year of their marriage. Sophie had been feeling isolated, raising the children alone, while Daniel buried himself in work. She often felt like a single parent, emotionally drained and neglected. That's when she met someone, Aaron. He was a colleague from her previous job, and their paths crossed unexpectedly at a social event. What began as innocent conversations quickly grew into something more. Aaron made Sophie feel seen in a way that Daniel hadn't in a long time. One evening, after too many drinks and too many moments of stolen glances, Sophie found herself kissing Aaron in the parking lot of the restaurant where they had been catching up. It didn't go further than that night, and Sophie swore to herself it had been a mistake. Filled with guilt, she kept it a secret, pushing it to the back of her mind. But the emotional distance between her and Daniel only grew. She threw herself back into family life, hoping to repair what was broken, but the guilt lingered. Daniel never brought it up, but Sophie knew he suspected something. She could see it in the way he sometimes looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. Quiet suspicion, lingering hurt. He never confronted her directly, but their relationship never fully recovered. Years passed, and though they tried to ignore the growing rift between them, the weight of their unspoken issues pulled them further apart. Sophie's infidelity wasn't the sole cause of their problems, but it was a wound that had never healed. One Saturday morning, Sophie stood in the kitchen, making coffee while Daniel sat at the table reading through work files. She sighed as she looked out the window, unable to shake the feeling that their marriage was no longer what it once was. "Can't you take a day off?" Sophie asked, her voice soft but strained. Daniel didn't look up from his papers. "I have a big case coming up. You know I can't just take a day off." Sophie pressed her lips together, trying to suppress her frustration. "You've been working every weekend for months. The kids barely see you anymore. I barely see you." Daniel glanced at her, his eyes tired. "I'm doing this for us, for the family." "It doesn't feel like it's for us," Sophie muttered, turning back to her coffee. This was how it had been for months. Daniel absorbed in work, Sophie absorbed in her thoughts, both avoiding the deeper conversations they needed to have. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday night. The kids were asleep, and Sophie sat in the living room, staring at the television without really watching it. Daniel had promised to be home by dinner, but it was past 10 p.m. when he finally walked through the door. "You're late," Sophie said flatly, not even looking at him. "I'm sorry," Daniel replied, setting his briefcase down. "There was a lot to get done." "We needed you tonight, Daniel," she said, her voice heavy with frustration. "The kids were asking for you." "I'm doing my best, Sophie," he said, rubbing his temples. "Can't you just understand how much pressure I'm under?" "I'm not sure I can understand anymore," Sophie said, her voice cracking. "When was the last time we even really talked? When was the last time you were here for me, for us?" Daniel stopped and stared at her, his eyes narrowing. "Is this about what happened with Aaron?" Sophie froze, her heart pounding in her chest. "What are you talking about?" "I know, Sophie," Daniel said, his voice low but steady. "I never brought it up because I didn't want to tear us apart, but I'd known for years." Tears welled up in Sophie's eyes. "Daniel, I swear, it was a mistake. It happened once, and I regretted it. I never wanted to hurt you." "But you did," Daniel said, his voice pained. "You hurt me, Sophie, and I don't think I've ever gotten over it." The room fell into silence as they both processed the gravity of his words. Sophie had always feared that Daniel knew, but hearing him say it out loud shattered the fragile illusion they had built around their marriage. In the weeks that followed, they tried to pick up the pieces. They went to therapy, but it felt like they were going through the motions. The wounds ran too deep. Sophie's infidelity, Daniel's emotional absence, years of unspoken frustrations. One evening, after another strained therapy session, Sophie sat down at the kitchen table with Daniel. The weight of their failed attempts hung in the air. "I think we both know this isn't working anymore," Sophie said quietly, her voice trembling. Daniel looked at her, his eyes filled with exhaustion. "Yeah," he admitted, his voice hoarse. "I think you're right." Tears filled Sophie's eyes as she nodded, knowing this was the end. "I never wanted it to come to this." "Neither did I," Daniel whispered, "but I think we lost each other a long time ago." They sat there in silence, the realization sinking in that their marriage was over. They had once promised each other forever, but now they were two people who had grown apart, weighed down by past mistakes and a life they could no longer share. The divorce was a quiet civil affair. They agreed to share custody of the children, focusing on what was best for them, but the emotional toll on both of them was heavy. Sophie struggled with the guilt of her past actions and the pain of losing the man she had once loved deeply. Daniel, though he had never fully confronted her about Aaron, knew the trust had been irreparably damaged. 6 months after the divorce, they had settled into their new routines. Sophie stayed in the family home with the children, while Daniel moved into an apartment nearby. They co-parented well, but the lingering sadness between them never fully disappeared. One evening, while dropping the kids off, Daniel lingered at the door. "How are you?" he asked softly. Sophie forced a smile. "I'm okay. It's been hard, but I'm managing." "I've been thinking," Daniel said, his eyes softening. "About us? About everything that happened." Sophie's heart clenched. "Me too." Daniel sighed. "I don't hate you, Sophie. I want you to know that. I wish things could have been different." "I do too," Sophie whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Daniel, for everything." He nodded, his own eyes shining with unshed tears. "Take care of yourself," he said softly before turning to leave. As he walked away, Sophie watched him, knowing they had both done the best they could, but sometimes love just wasn't enough. Reader comments. Heartbroken yet hopeful. This story really hit home. Infidelity doesn't always come from a place of malice, but the pain is real and lasting. Sophie and Daniel's journey felt so raw and real. Mary Dan struggling. I relate to this so much. The way they both carried their hurt without fully dealing with it is so common in marriages. It's heartbreaking to watch it unravel. Lost in Love, the addition of Sophie's infidelity as a turning point made this story even more layered. Infidelity is hard to overcome, especially when there are other problems beneath the surface. Seeking forgiveness. I've been where Sophie is. The guilt, the way she tried to make things right but knew deep down she couldn't. It's hard to read, but it's so honest. Please consider subscribing for more stories like this, and remember, as Truman said, good morning, and in case I don't see ya, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.